Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Enough Said. I am your host, Cedric Newbern, where I share just ideas and tips on how you can improve relationships at work and at home so that you can be the best you possible. Today, I want to talk about something that is really uncomfortable for most, and that is getting comfortable with the unknown. So, you remember when we were children, how exciting it was to get a surprise? Your mom or your dad or your classmate or whomever it was would walk into class and say, "Hey, I got a surprise for you." You're like, "Oh, what is it? What is it?" You could not wait to get that surprise. Remember, we love surprises. We love getting in the car and being told, "Hey, where are we going?" Just sit there, be quiet. It's a surprise. We were so excited because our mind starts to go to, are we going to the fair? Are we going to the museum? Are we going to get ice cream? We were just overwhelmed with excitement based on, be quiet. It's a surprise. You'll know when you get there. And you remember riding roller coasters? Now, granted, as I got older, I kind of realized that I didn't like roller coasters, but for many of us, the excitement of the roller coaster was in the climb up the hill because you really didn't know what was next. You knew that something was going to happen. You knew that there was going to be a drop and a curve and possibly a flip or a turn or something that was going to happen. And that just brought to you a level of excitement that made waiting in line worthwhile. But somewhere along the way, things changed. Something happened to us when it came to the unknown that made it very uncomfortable. Was it trauma? Could it have been disappointment? Or could it have been hurt that we experienced as a result of the unknown causing us to change from excitement to fear? So I did a little research, and there was an article on healthline.com entitled Understanding and Overcoming Fear of the Unknown. And it was written by Rebecca Joy Stanborough, and it was medically reviewed by Cynthia Cobb. And you'll understand why that was important in just a second. But fear of the unknown is truly the basis of many anxieties. Lots of phobias that people experience is rooted in this fear of the unknown. And so there's been a term that's been used quite a bit here in the news, and it's xenophobia. Now, that's actually a psychological term that is much broader in meaning than what we've heard here lately, where it's just this fear of strangers and fear of foreigners. But in fact, it is the fear of the unknown. That is the truest definition of xenophobia. Let that sit in. There is this fear of the unknown, and the effects can be felt in your body. So, for those of us that have suffered with anxiety and other disorders, you know what I'm talking about. You have fast heartbeat, you have this tensing of your muscles, and this uncontrollable feeling of weakness at times, and even the shallow breathing and your sugar spikes, your blood glucose spikes. All of these are physical manifestations of the internal thoughts we're having. Now, if you're prone to worrying a lot, the article says that you might have developed a habit of what they're calling catastrophizing. And that's imagining the worst case scenario possible. And that's, in fact, a cognitive distortion. And this way of thinking, they say, creates an inaccurate view of reality. Now, I'll tell you that I am one that now I have a name for it because that's me. When I'm driving down the street, quite often on a two-lane road, which I'm on, unfortunately, more than I'd like, I often imagine the car that's coming toward me in the opposite direction hitting me head on and imagining what that might be like. I've done that for at least 20 years. So imagine I drive on a given day 100, sometimes 150 miles a day, and that's what's going on in my head. Imagining a truck coming over into my lane, crushing my car. It's overwhelming. It's exhausting, to be honest with you, especially knowing that my job requires me to commute quite a distance. And the problem is, as we know, this fear of the unknown is caused by the lack of predictability of life, as well as the lack of control. Like, I cannot predict what another driver is going to do. I can't. I wish I could, but I'm not able to. I'm also not able to control the behavior of another driver. And we all know that people are driving distracted. They're texting, they're changing, they're trying to find their favorite song on their streaming service, and they are not looking at where they're going. I cannot control that. And it takes me to that worst case scenario that someone could, in fact, hurt, injure, or even kill me. And this can lead to anxiety. It can lead to depression and other disorders if we're not able to control it. Disorders like eating and alcohol abuse and hoarding. All of these things can come from this fear of the unknown. So, how can we overcome the fear of unknown? The article talks about it, and I absolutely agree. Number one, question your assumptions. Why in the world am I thinking that just because I'm driving down this road, somebody's going to hit me? To what extent is that belief true and even logical, right? Have I adopted some cognitive disorder, as I just talked about, in order to survive past difficulties? That's why I mentioned, is there a trauma in your life? Is there something that happened that makes you uncomfortable with the lack of predictability and the lack of control that you have? Another thing that you can do, number two, is do your research. You're able in many ways to shrink that fear of unknown by increasing the knowledge that you have. So I'll share with you in full disclosure, and you'll learn this about me, and especially in this podcast, and as you get to know me, I'm all about vulnerability. I suffer with anxiety. I do. I found out now almost 10 years ago what I thought was an allergic reaction. Later on, only found out that that was, in fact, an anxiety attack that I was having. And I'd had one or two in a year or so and didn't think anything of it. But then all of a sudden, finally had an accurate diagnosis from my doctor, thank goodness, but also ended up in COVID. And if you remember, we were being served on a daily basis all of this about, people's health and the challenges and the underlying conditions and the impact that it could have, and that your COVID would be more severe on you and than others. And I knew people that passed away after having COVID. I have for years had this fear of having a heart attack. And it started, I remember there was a news anchor in Chicagoland who passed away, and I want to say he was in his 30s, and they found him in a hotel room by himself. He had had a heart attack. And I started thinking, what am I going to do if something like that happened to me? I've got this amazing family, this young son, this beautiful wife. I want to be there for them. And that catastrophizing kicks in, and all of a sudden the worst case scenario always starts to show up for me. So the second I started feeling tightness in my chest or congestion or indigestion, which by the way I have, reflux, um, it, a weird heartbeat, and even worse, hearing myself breathe at night when I go to bed, that became the onset of a few anxiety attacks over COVID during the height of COVID. And then, of course, having this fear of having a heart attack, by the way, started talking. And at that time, my dad and I talked about the fact that my grandfather had heart issues and passed away from a heart attack. And then, lo and behold, after COVID, my dad passes away from a heart attack. So you can imagine now this fear of having a heart attack is even more heightened than before. So I went to the doctor, and thank goodness I've got an amazing doctor. I love her to death. She is amazing. She understands where I'm coming from. And I've been open and honest with her about my issues. She knows about my anxiety. And so I've talked with her about this. And She helped me get through the battery of tests that were needed so that now I know that my heart is actually fine. Now I can deal with the anxiety that comes from when I get, unfortunately, a really bad case of indigestion. But doing your research helps with that. Okay. Also, number three, staying grounded in the here and now. Often, this issue of control, right? We want to control everything, but we know that there are things that we cannot control. However, if you can do an inventory of the things that you can control and find ways that those things that you are responsible for, the impact that they can have on those things that you're not responsible for, and taking those step by step at a time, that helps also to reduce this fear of the unknown. Because as they say, you can only control what you can control. That means I can control my behaviors. I can control what I am responsible for. So little things like if you're worried about finances, make a budget. Understand how much money is coming in and how much needs to go out. If you're worried about your health, like I was, go to your doctor and be an advocate for yourself. Get the tests done so that you better understand what things may be impacting you down the road. They have a lot of tests that can predict things, right? So they're indicators, upstream measures, as we like to call it in corporate, upstream measures that you can test to make sure that you are, in fact, healthy. Or if there's some things that you can do now to help offset some of those issues you may have. Be your own advocate. Number four, manage stress with a healthy lifestyle. Now, I cannot stress this more. Yes, we hear it all day, every day, but it's important to get your exercise. Walking calms your nerves. Rest, get enough rest, eat healthy, have positive relationships. If you're in toxic relationships, and unfortunately, often those are relationships we can't get out of, let's say it's family, minimize the impact of those relationships on your life by spending less time or being very proactive in setting boundaries to ensure that that toxic behavior and that toxic relationship does not have a lasting impact on your spirit. And also practice mindfulness, self-care, making sure that you are meditating and praying or whatever it is that you need to do so that your mind is healthy. And then number five, talk to someone you trust. Obviously, I'm a strong advocate for talking to a therapist. I've talked with therapists over the years to help me better understand what's going on, why I have this fear, and what strategies can I put in place to reframe the thinking that I have. I also have a strong network of friends, very close friends, that I can talk with about these things. And my amazing wife, she knows when I'm stressed that there are certain things that she can do for me and with me to help calm me down when I'm feeling that anxiousness coming on. And last but not least, you can journal. Journaling in many ways, again, helps you own the fear, right? If you write it down, there's this power, so to speak, in how you're able to own your fear by naming it and putting it in writing. Now, I get it. It's always frightening when we walk into a dark room. There's that fear of the unknown, not knowing what's in front of us that actually could cause us pain, sometimes immobilizes us. It paralyzes us in the moment. But just remember, when we sit still just for a moment, just a minute or so, our eyes, they begin to adjust to the lighting or to the lack of lighting. The darkness doesn't seem as dark. And then that allows us then to see a path forward, to have better vision in that darkness. Now, we know that the vision isn't perfect. It's not like walking in a room and turning a light on so that you can see everything. But you at least have an image of the larger obstacles that are in your path to ensure that you're able to get through that room in the dark. And I believe the same is true in life. Get comfortable with the unknown. Sit still. Understand that your vision is going to improve so that you can see a path forward in your life. Thank you for joining another episode of Enough Said. Again, you can follow me on social media platforms under Cedric Newburn. You can also find this podcast wherever you stream your podcasts. So whether it's iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, you name it, it's YouTube, the videos out there. And I encourage you to share this with others and follow and subscribe so that you can hear more stories and find ways that you can overcome so that you can be who you have been wonderfully made to be. Thank you so much, and I will see you on the next episode of Enough Said.